The battlefield in the southeast Ukraine is dominated by a geographic feature that is known as the Donbas industrial area. Attacking in or around it has had really bad luck. In the Russian Civil War, the Red Army launched a major attack here, and as a result, it had to retreat more than halfway back to Moscow. In the Second World War, the Germans had to undertake their first major retreat after failing to capture the Donbas, and when the Red Army attacked here after that, it lost more than 250,000 men without anything to show for it. So, is this place cursed? Well, it is not a curse, but terrain. Urban areas with buildings are very difficult to attack, and the Donbas industrial area has a lot of them. How much? Well, imagine Stalingrad. Now multiply it by 6 and divide it over a larger area. Before the Second World War, 6 times more people lived in the cities of the Donbas than was the population of Stalingrad. Given how difficult it was to capture Stalingrad, you probably get the picture. This is the reason attacking has been so unsuccessful here. Speaking of the Battle of Stalingrad, this is where the previous video in this series ended. This video will cover the fighting in the Donbas from the Battle of Stalingrad to 2015. The Battle of Stalingrad was a major success for the Red Army. It resulted in the destruction of many German and Romanian units. After that, the Red Army completely routed the forces of Germany's allies. Then the Soviets moved out against German units who had survived the Battle of Stalingrad. The Germans had set up their positions behind the Seversky Donets River, and the Soviets deployed 8 armies against them. Most of them were to advance from the east, and only 2 armies were deployed to the north. Their goal was to advance from 2 directions and occupy the Donbas industrial area. We will now look in detail into the fighting in the Donbas, beginning with the attack from the east. The Soviets crossed the Seversky Donets River. They now set out to capture the major city of Luhansk, but they got bogged down fighting in the strongly fortified outskirts of the city. The Soviets reorganized their forces and attempted to bypass Lugansk from the south. The Germans used this time to pull back their forces from the Seversky Donets to a much shorter line before the towns of Alchevsk, Hrustalny and Snizhne. With the new forces, they were able to eliminate the Soviet breakthrough and continue to successfully repel the Soviet attacks. The Soviets did not have the time to launch a major attack, because at that time they began suffering reverses west of the Donbas industrial area. At the same time, other Soviet forces were moving towards Donetsk from the north. The Soviets bypassed the German strongpoints. Then they set out to cross the Seversky Donets River. The Soviets now had to overcome the German strongpoints in the cities of the Donbas industrial area. The Red Army moved in to encircle Lysychansk, and in order to avoid being encircled, the German forces abandoned the town. In the west, the Soviets captured Kramatorsk and encircled the German garrison in Slovyansk, but the Germans used the reinforcements to restore the connection to their strongpoint in the town. The Red Army now attacked south towards Konstantinovka and Bakhmut, but the German defenses proved too strong to overcome. So the Soviets changed their strategy and launched an outflanking maneuver to the west. The Soviets achieved surprise, and their tanks captured the railway junction of Pokrovsk. They attempted to continue towards Donetsk, but were stopped by German reinforcements. Both sides continued to fight for Pokrovsk. At this moment, the tide of the battle turned. The German forces in the west launched a major counteroffensive and encircled the forward Soviet forces. This helped the Germans to go on the offensive in the Donbas, and they encircled and destroyed the Soviet forces in Pokrovsk. The Germans continued the counteroffensive, and the Soviets now lacked the troops to man the whole front. The Soviets fell back, but they could not restore the integrity of the front, and the Germans continued to bypass them. As part of this, the German tank forces encircled the Soviet garrisons in Kramatorsk and Slavyansk. Unable to withstand the German counterattack, the Red Army retreated behind the Seversky Donets River. This included abandoning their last positions in the western part of the industrial area in the city of Lysychansk. Verdict: the Germans could launch a successful counterattack against the Soviets because the Red Army got bogged down in the Donbas industrial area. During the next summer, the Battle of Kursk was fought. The Red Army won the battle, and in this, it was aided with getting access to the German plan of attack. Why did this happen? Well, because the Germans did not use this video sponsor Atlas VPN. Atlas VPN is a service that protects your data, but this is not all that it does. Wanna see a magic trick? This is the price of accommodation. And this is the price of the accommodation after I change my location by using Atlas VPN. Many web services, such as accommodation booking sites, take your location into account and use it to charge different rates to people in different countries to have an advantage. With Atlas VPN, you can change that to your advantage by directing your traffic through different countries' servers. Atlas VPN creates a virtual tunnel that keeps your IP address secret and protects your data when being exposed to public Wi-Fi networks and web trackers and other malicious things on the internet. Take that, data stealers! Atlas VPN helps you save money online, but that is not the only bonus. As now it is Christmas, you can get Atlas VPN for just $70 per month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Check out the link below to get this offer. The link below. Don't be like the Germans. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, the Red Army won the Battle of Kursk and began an offensive along the whole front. As part of this, they aimed to capture the Donbas. This time, the Soviets wanted to avoid fighting in the cities and attempted to go around them by striking from north and east towards Donetsk. But despite avoiding fighting in the cities, this plan was also not favorable because this meant the Soviets would have to divide their effort into two unsupported attacks. The northern attack crossed the Seversky Donets but could not advance further. The eastern attack made some progress, but the Germans brought up their armor and the Soviets were defeated by a German counterattack. The Soviet attempt to take the Donbas had failed. The Soviets waited until their offensives outside of the Donbas had dealt great damage to the Germans, and then they launched another attempt. By that time, the Germans had run out of their forces for a counterattack. They did have enough forces to contain the more dangerous Soviet northern attack, but they lacked reinforcements to send against the Soviet eastern attack, and here the Soviets broke through south of the industrial area. The Germans could not stop the Soviet offensive and began withdrawing their forces to avoid encirclement. They abandoned all of the Donbas industrial zone and retreated to the next defensive line on the Dnipro River. The Soviet Union took control over the Donbas industrial area. Verdict: the Soviets were able to capture the Donbas industrial area after they were able to defeat the German forces outside it. The battles of the Second World War were over. But at that time, the seeds of a new conflict in the Donbas were sown. The industries of the Donbas, which were on the territory of Soviet Ukraine, were greatly expanded, a lot of workforce being drawn there from the territory of Russia, which made this territory mostly Russian-speaking. Now, fast forward several decades and the Soviet Union has collapsed, and in 2014, Russia and Ukraine entered into open conflict. With the Donbas being mostly Russian-speaking, there were many pro-Russian people there, and under Russian influence, they started an insurgency against Ukraine. They took over most of the cities of the Donbas and declared themselves to be the separatist Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. Ukraine deployed 60,000 soldiers to the region and prepared to go on the offensive. Many armies before had attempted to take the Donbas industrial area and had failed. But Ukraine had a chance because the pro-Russian separatists lacked military equipment, and this gave the Ukrainian forces an advantage. There was a problem though. Russia would attempt to supply the separatist forces with military gear. Ukraine's plan was to advance with part of its forces into the industrial area from the north and west. But the most critical task for the Ukrainian strategy would be given to the forces in the south, who would blockade the Russian border with the separatist regions to prevent the movement of supplies. Ukrainian forces swept in from the south to take control over most of the border area, but they lacked the strength to secure all of the border and could not fully prevent the flow of the supplies. At the same time, other forces began recapturing territory. The Ukrainians had previously encircled Sloviansk and controlled an airfield near Kramatorsk, which enabled them to force the separatists out of these locations. The Ukrainian forces then retook Konstantinovka and then proceeded towards Bakhmut, which they captured with the help of an Ukrainian military garrison. The advance of Ukrainian forces now threatened to encircle the separatist forces in the cities of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, which prompted the separatists to withdraw from them, and the Ukrainian forces took over the territory. In the east, the Ukrainian forces linked up with their forces holding on at the Luhansk airport and took the city of Luhansk into semi-encirclement. In the west, the Ukrainian forces made contact with their garrison of the Donetsk airport and advanced up to the outskirts of the major cities of Donetsk and Horlivka. In the center, the Ukrainian forces proceeded south and captured the town of Debaltseve, a key supply node for the whole of the Donbas industrial area. But the Ukrainian forces could not control all of the border, and the flow of reinforcements and equipment from Russia continued. The separatists had received a large amount of Russian military equipment and used it against the Ukrainian forces on the border. These forces suffered major damage and their supply route was cut. Ukraine had to redeploy its forces from the north to reopen the route and pull back its troops from the exposed position. With Ukraine losing access to much of the border, it now attempted to make a smaller encirclement by connecting its forces on the border to those near Luhansk. But the separatist forces counterattacked, making these positions too vulnerable. This plan had to be abandoned and Ukraine withdrew its forces. Then Ukraine attempted to conduct a smaller encirclement from a more safe position by moving from the southwest towards Debaltseve. Ukrainian forces reached the town of Ilovaisk. By that time, it is believed that Russia sent large units of its military to fight for the separatists, and these forces launched a major counterattack. They encircled the Ukrainian troops near Ilovaisk. Then the Russian and separatist forces crossed the Russian border in the south and linked up their territories with the sea. With the enemy becoming stronger, Ukraine withdrew its forces from under Luhansk to avoid encirclement, but it attempted to hold on to the important transport node of Debaltseve. Nevertheless, the Russian and the separatist forces continued the offensive. First, they captured the Donetsk airport from the Ukrainian troops and then pushed the Ukrainian forces out of Debaltseve in early 2015. After that, a ceasefire was signed, which put an end to large offensive operations. Verdict: Ukraine failed to capture the Donbas industrial area because it did not have enough strength to encircle it. Although Ukraine failed to retake the whole of the Donbas industrial area, it did capture the northeastern part of the area, and this area would play a major role when Russia and Ukraine would enter into a full-scale war in 2022. We will cover that in the next video. Have a private Christmas and a safe New Year with Atlas VPN Premium. Use the link below.